And I guess that's why, after I was just at the end of reading through the chapter and doing my commentary on it, some commentary that came up, it was talking about David being discouraged. So that's why I was like, let me go with that. Um, and there goes my video. And I was just saying how, I want to be consistent, and this is an important part of this channel for me, is that I can daily read the Bible, and you can read daily along with me. I'm hoping so. I was off to a start a couple of consecutive days, and Friday didn't happen for me, and I said I'm going to have to do it in the morning, um, and which was my plan. And when I didn't, it didn't happen. So I was like, I gotta get to that routine. And so even though I've been doing this for half an hour already, I am going to go ahead and continue to do this before I get to what else I have to do today. And that's okay. Okay, this is important. So we are on chapter 27 of First Samuel. Also, my camera's doing something a little bit weird. I wanted to make sure this was actually able to be recorded because it seems that there's a bit of a lag. Hopefully, that's not too distracting. Um, so we're gonna press on and push forward through this material. All right, starting right at the beginning, chapter 27. But David thought to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. And I was saying, you'll understand why he's kind of at this resolution by going back and listening to my last video. You'll see that sort of this cyclical um, pattern, I'll say, that has gone on between Saul and David has reared its, I'll say, ugly head again. It just seems like it just keeps coming to that, right? He thinks Saul is, he's back to, I'm going to, I was wrong, my son, those kinds of words. But David knows better at this point. And he says, the, the, uh, the best thing I can do is to escape to the land of the Philistines. And I was thinking, you're going to go stay in the land of the Philistines? But David can handle the Philistines, right? We know this. But still, when you're going to live among the people that have been staunch enemies, that's quite a resolve. Let's see why. Then Saul will give up searching for me anywhere in Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. Now, my first thought was that Saul won't guess that he would do that, and that's why he would just give up, and be like, I can't crack this one. But as I read on, I have read on, I see that may not have been the strategy. So let's see what it really is. So David and the 600 men with him left and went over to Achish, son of Magog, king of Gath. David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him, and David had his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. And if you are not familiar with the story of Abigail, I do encourage you to go back and listen. It's a great one. Introduce Abigail and how she became the wife of David. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. So it worked. But right off the bat, he just didn't even search for him. So something about that makes me think that Saul was not willing to go into that territory. Then David said to Achish, if I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be assigned to me in one of the country towns, that I may live there. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you? Keep in mind, strategy. So on that day, Ashish gave him Ziklag, and it has belonged to the kings of Judah ever since. And I think this just shows like providence, or God's sovereign, because that was his people, the land of Judah. Okay, or the kings of Judah. Um, David lived in Philistine territory a year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these peoples had lived in the land extending to Shur and Egypt. And Amalekites really sounds familiar to me, and probably to you too. What I'm thinking is they may be the people, and I may be wrong though. So this is my guess, is that they may have been the people who Saul was supposed to completely destroy, if you will remember that. And I talked when I was recording before, I kind of wanted to just make a note of that. Like God sometimes would give that order to, for a purpose, not leave anyone behind alive of that people. And Saul said that he did what God asked him to do, but he really didn't. And and we've read about that further back. Okay, that may have been the Amalekites who are still here. So whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camels, and clothes. Then he returned to Ashish. So this is what makes me think it sounds so harsh, but that it must have been God giving him the directive to like wipe people out. That's what I'm guessing, because God has, has done that in the past. So, okay, there's just a little bit more. Excuse all the sounds today, all these alarms going off. So when Ashish asked, "Where did you go raiding today?" David would say, "Against the Negev of Judah," or "against the Negev of Jerusalem," no, sorry, not Jerusalem, of Jeremiel, or "against the Negev of the Kenites." He did not leave a man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he thought they might inform on us and say, "This is what David did." So yeah, so there's something there where it sounds like, when I said strategy, it says something that David is doing, whereas I was thinking maybe this was a decree from God to wipe out these people for a purpose. And then the Philistines were an enemy of God. And I was just saying, in the past that has been so that certain things wouldn't get propagated into the future, because God has, like I said, he has a purpose in it. We don't always know the fullness of that. But anyway, I'll leave that alone. That topic can be big and hard. Let's see what David's up to. All right. And such was his practice as long as he lived in Philistine territory. Ashish trusted David and said to himself, "He has become so obnoxious to his people, the Israelites, that he will be my servant for life." So to me, it's sounding like maybe Ashish thinks that he's dealing with people who Ashish would want dealt with, but maybe he's actually dealing with people and thinking that, oh, he's working for me now. The fact that his people will think he's obnoxious, like, wow, David has really gone to the other side, or something like that. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm not totally sure. I was admittedly not sure what's going on here, so I went to some commentary and I wanted to do that together. So I went to the first site that came up on commentary about 1 Samuel chapter 27, is from a site called enduringword.com. Okay? And so its title is 1 Samuel 27, David flees to the Philistines. And they made some interesting comments. It was, or commentary, I feel like they're kind of making it like a practical lesson here. So it says David joins the Philistine leader Achish. 1, David's discouraged decision. So if you remember the beginning of the chapter, it's a pretty short chapter. You probably remember that. Where it says, and David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. In so many words, or I'll be destroyed in my translation. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me anymore in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. Okay? David said in his heart. The sad story of 1 Samuel 27 begins with something David said in his heart. He may never have said it out loud. He may never have said it to anyone else. He may have never said it to God. But David said it in his heart. And what we say in our heart has a tremendous power to shape our thinking, our actions, and even our whole destiny. So that's definitely a lesson this is a lesson, I think, that they're teaching. Point B. Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. This is what David said in his heart. That was a word of discouragement coming from a heart tired of trusting God for his continued deliverance. This is a lesson, all right. This is a lesson that I feel like I have been learning. Okay, in his discouragement, David forgot God's past deliverance. Okay, so, quote, okay, let's see where this is coming from. Oh, it's a quote from Spurgeon, so somebody who is a theologian talking about scripture, I believe. So he says, quote, I will remember on one occasion, to my shame, being sad and doubtful of heart, and a kind friend took out a paper and read to me a short extract from a discourse upon faith. I very soon detected the author of the extract. My friend was reading to me from one of my own sermons. Without saying a word, he just left it to my own conscience, for he had convicted me of committing the very fault against which I had so earnestly declaimed. Okay, unquote, by Spurgeon. C. Now, remember we have the points about saying something in your heart, what he was saying in his heart, being discouraging, and C. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. So it says, David decided to leave Israel and live among the idol-worshipping Philistines. David was so discouraged that he thought there was nothing better for him in Israel and among God's people. Now, I did not see it this way when I was reading. Let's keep going. D. Saul will despair of me to seek me anymore in any part of Israel, so I shall escape out of his hand. Before David trusted in the Lord to protect him from the hand of Saul. Now, David gave up trusting in the Lord and instead left the land of promise, left the people of God, and found protection among the Philistines. Okay, and I wasn't seeing it this way. Like I said, I assumed that God sent him there, wipe out these people who were coming against him, right? And there was some, I thought there was some obedience in his strategizing. But according to this commentary, it sounds like the opposite. So it's good there, it's good to get this word and to, to have somebody who has studied this in the context even more to have, shed some light. So let's see. Saul will despair, it says in bold. Saul will not despair if David leaves the land of promise. Saul will not despair if David forsakes the people of God and joins the ungodly. True. It is David who is in despair, not Saul. And I was kind of curious why Saul wouldn't follow him there. Maybe it's that Saul's like, my my job is accomplished. I don't have to kill David. David's already taken care of. He's joined the enemy camp. Maybe that's why he just let it go right away once he found that out. And that makes sense. Okay, and then the next point under that heading is, well, it's not really a heading, but this is the the letter D was Saul will despair of me to seek me anymore in any part of Israel, so I will escape out of his hand, taking it into his own hands, basically his own protection. Next point, Saul could never drive David to the Philistines. If Saul told David, you must leave the people of God and go live among the Philistines, David would never bow to it. But discouragement and despair are more powerful enemies than Saul. Discouragement and despair will drive David to do something that Saul could never make him do. That's good. That's a word. Okay, number 2. This verses 2 through 4. David goes over to Achish, leader of Gath. Then David arose and went over to the 600 men who were with him to Achish, the son of Malch, king of Gath. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. David arose and went over to with 600 men. David's discouraged and despairing heart didn't only affect himself. He led 600 men out of the land of promise to live with the ungodly. Before David sunk into his pit of discouragement and despair, he would have never dreamed of doing this. Wow. Next point, 1 Samuel 27, verse 3 makes it even worse. Each man with his household. So it's multiplying, right? Yeah. David's defection to the Philistines touched even more than the 600 men. It touched all their families. It directly touched David's household also because Ahinoam and Abigail, who was trusting, him to be following God, were with him. Yeah, I didn't realize that he was like defecting there. So, in this case, I guess what Ashish had to say in the end of that chapter was probably pretty true. His people will see him as, what do they say? What did he say? It said he has become so obnoxious, right, to his people, the Israelites, that he will be my servant for life. Interesting. So what is David doing over here in this land? So, let's see. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath. Previously recorded in 1 Samuel 21:10 through 15, David briefly went over to Achish of the Philistines, believing there might be a place of refuge for him. Okay, because it definitely, at the beginning of this chapter, it was like, okay, this is somebody he knows, right? God allowed that experience to quickly turn sour, and David pretended to be a madman so he could escape. Okay, coming back. In his discouragement and despair, David will go down a road of sin he has been down before. There's a word too. Okay. Achish received David this time when he would not, in 1 Samuel 21:10 through 15, for 2 reasons. First, it is clear now, when it wasn't clear before, that David and Achish shared the same enemy, Saul. Second, David now brings with him 600 fighting men whom Achish can use as mercenaries. Next point, it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. David accomplished his immediate goal because Saul stopped pursuing him, but now David is in a place of compromise that will leave him worse off than before. He is actually submitting to a Philistine master. We have no record of any psalms that David wrote during this time. This was not a high point in his spiritual life. In this period, David didn't write sweet psalms to the Lord. The sweet singer was mute. He probably acquired a few new strains of music or even mastered some fresh instruments while sojourning at Gath, a memory of which is perpetuated in the term gittith, a term which frequently occurs in the inscriptions of the Psalms composed afterward. But who would barter a song for a melody, a psalm for a guitar? It was a poor exchange. That's from someone named Meyer. Quote. Let's see. There is a lot here, and there's probably not too much more though. Let's keep going. Sorry. Okay. All right. Be part of this point. David became a bandit. David receives the city of Ziklag. Then David said to Ishish, "If I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there." Okay, I thought maybe he was going behind his back and accomplishing something against the Philistines, but I'm not sure that yet. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? So Ashish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore, Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. Now, the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 full year and 4 months. Okay. Again, I was thinking, okay, God had some providence in this because this land now continues to belong to Judah. It says, well, let's see how that became about. David said to Achish, I have now found favor in your eyes. Before, David never cared about finding favor in the eyes of a Philistine ruler. This is a great change in David. Okay. I'm sorry, it's messing up where I'm at. Where was I? Sorry, you guys. Okay. Okay, so he would never have done that before. This is a great change in David. Okay, why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? It's smart to hear David say to a Philistine ruler, your servant. Okay, true, that didn't jump out at me at first. David wanted his own city because he needed freedom to operate his own independent policy without being observed too closely. That was taken from Baldwin, another commentator, I guess. Let them give me a place that I may dwell there. In David's mind, this isn't just a visit to the Philistines. He may say to himself that he will someday return to Israel, but he isn't planning on a short stay among the ungodly. He wants to dwell there, and he did for 1 full year and 4 months. Now, David, his 600 men, and their families lived in a completely new situation. They lived in a fortified city, a formal place of defense. But apart from God, they aren't safer in the city. David's new occupation, a roving bandit. And David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites and Girzites and Amalekites, for those nations were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as you go to Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. So whenever David attacked the land, he left neither man nor woman alive, but took away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. David and his men went up and raided. Okay, the Hebrew word raided comes from the verb to strip, with the idea of stripping the dead for loot. David attacked these villages or encampments, killed some of the men, stripped them, well, not killed all of them, for treasure or armor, and robbed the people of the village and encampment. This was no way of life for a man after God's own heart. Okay, yeah. Well, certainly if it wasn't a directive of God. And it makes sense too. It's like he's looting, like he's killing people, but taking from them too. I mean, there were times when God like allowed them to take the treasures of the enemies too, I believe. But again, if this isn't under God's direction, this is definitely not a good thing to hear about David being, at that point willing to do. The Geshurites, the Girzites, and Amalekites. David hasn't totally turned against God and his people, for now he only attacks the enemies of Israel. This probably gave David some comfort, but it is a small consolation to know that you aren't as bad as you possibly could be. He left neither man or woman alive, but took away. Even though he attacked the enemies of Israel, David was nothing more than an armed robber and murderer. He killed all the people of the village or encampment, took the spoil, and did it without the approval or guidance of God. He now fought wars for profit instead of for God's honor. That's a big one. Oof. David lies to Achish. So this was the part where I started to be like, okay, what is really going on here? And then Achish would say, where have you made a raid today? And David would say, against the southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the Jerahmeelites, or against the southern area of the Kenites. David would save neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, saying, lest they should inform on us, saying, thus David did. And thus was his behavior all the time he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying he has made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore, he will be my servant forever. And David would say against the southern area of Judah, David didn't lie to Achish because he was ashamed of what he did. He lied to gain favor with Achish. Like manipulating, right? He knew the Philistine leader would be pleased to hear that David raided his own people of Israel. David would save neither man or woman alive, but bring news to Gath. In his raids, David killed all the men and women, so his lie to Achish would not be exposed. And so this is when you know you are in the wrong territory, literally and figuratively. You're going to make sure the truth doesn't get out, right? So that's just something like, if you're kind of like, well, how do I make sure that word doesn't get over here? Check yourself. Okay. Yeah. Been there, done that. Much later in his life, David will have a far more notorious season of sin with Bathsheba, because that is what sticks with us, isn't it? And end up killing her husband Uriah to cover his sin. Though that later event is far more famous, the root of sin that nourished it began way back in 1 Samuel 27, right here where we are. Here, many years before David killed Uriah to cover his sin, David killed these men and women in his raids to cover his sin. The roots of sin must be dealt with, or they come back with greater strength and greater, what's the word? Impact, right? Yeah, that impacted David. I mean, we're like, we don't think, I mean, we hear he's a man after God's own heart, but it's hard to believe sometimes. We're like, man, David did that though, So, yeah, that definitely impacted his story. So Achish believed David, saying, he has made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore, he will be my servant forever. Achish felt he was in a good place. David was trapped in a web, and Achish was the spider. Achish believed that David had forsaken all connection with the people of God. It all looked rather dark, but David had not and could not burn his bridge with God. David takes sides with the Philistines against Israel. Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. So as she said to David, you assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men. And wait a minute, I don't remember this part. And David said to Achish, surely you know what your servant can do. And she said to David, therefore I will make you one of my chief guardians forever. Beginning of the next chapter. Okay, that's the beginning of the next chapter. There's a little bit more, but I think it's talking about that. So let's stop there for today and let's come back to it. And I would love to continue with this commentary. I think it was very helpful to me. So I'm glad that I kind of had another go around. I started the chapter 3 times. Really, it just didn't. It still got by me what was really happening. Obviously, I've been here before. I've read through this material, and now I'm reading it again with you already. And it's sometimes it just takes that. So let's. Um, I'm thankful for being able to read together, for sharing and hearing from another commentary and learning from one another as the people of God. And if you didn't catch my last video, my daughter has started a series called Big Little Bible Studies, and that's because she was saying like there are always people who are kind of maybe more mature or know certain things that they can share with the younger or those who are maybe younger in the faith, and then but it goes both ways in the sharing, and you can really see it in how she shares this material, this actual same material. They happen to be starting out talking about David, um and so I just wanted to kind of promote, and you know what I mean, just basically, yeah, have you check it out, because I think you'll really get something from it. Okay, like just yeah, in addition to what we're talking about here, it's a great discussion. So um her YouTube channel is called Fine for Jesus. Okay, so her name is Aaliyah Strange. So my Felicia Strange, Aaliyah Strange, in case you're having trouble finding.